the fact that they really put a lot of thought into this report. I was particularly pleased that the report didn't just focus on Keller Alpine, but actually looked at how it fits into the areas north and the areas that flow into the village and where we flow out. I mean, pretty clearly we're built on a watershed, and there's a lot of impact that's already happened. We're not going to tear the village down, so how can we make sure that the next things that we do are really mindful of where we are? And so I echo what Coral said, and I really appreciate the work that's gone into this and their willingness to collaborate.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Next up is the discussion of possible action items. The new library site selection, next steps for library project, including preliminary site layout, site-specific costs, and upcoming joint meeting with the village board.
And I'm going to just talk about 2 quick pages before Jeff is going to take it away. And he's going to try to just do an overview because I know you all had the materials and have read them ahead of time, but then really want to have a chance for you to ask any questions and to have a really good discussion about what questions or concerns or considerations that you have on your mind. So I just want to point out the first 2 pages that we did provide from information from Elise Cruz at the village, helps provide about the 2 sites in terms of the acreage. So you have the Brook Street site is about 2.4 acres. If you exclude Waterman Street, if you add Waterman Street into that, it's about 2.6. The concepts we're showing you tonight exclude Waterman Street. And then the number of acres that was being considered on the Alpine Parkway site. Both properties are owned by the village. The current zoning is shown, and then the future zoning in the comprehensive plan is shown. Another thing that's come up often is just accessibility. So we did include the number of households and the number of children living within a half-mile radius of each location for your reference. And that is information that came from Dane County GIS specialists. So the number of households is very similar. There's actually more children living within a half a mile on the Alpine Parkway location, just because a lot of the downtown neighbors are businesses or park space. So there's not as many residences within that distance downtown. So that's the first page. And then we did include, just for kind of refreshing people's memories for the village board, we did include just a site layout. So you can see that the Brook Street site would encompass the current library property in the library parking, as well as the current senior center and post office. And I'm not sure, some people may or may not understand that it's talking about that whole area at present.
And Jennifer, as well as the alleyway that goes between too, just so everyone kind of understands that too.
And then the other location, we had at one point shown kind of the 4-acre block, but because I don't have the expertise to draw this on correctly, we don't have the red shown here, but it is showing the entire area. The village owned property is the property to the south with the kind of jagged line in the middle here. At the end of Oregon Parks Avenue is kind of where our initial site location had been focused on. So that's kind of the context for the discussion. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Jeff, do you want to start with the site cost comparison? Or do you want to show the drawings first?
Well, I think the best visual would be to look at the library only site on Brook Street. I'm going to start with that, and then we can talk about the 2 other scenarios. And like Jennifer said, there's a lot of information, so I'm not going to go through every single thing. But you can see that the analysis that we did is similar to what we did at Main Street. We tried to identify all the challenge areas, put dollars to those, and really think through how the different properties, are abnormal compared to a site where we would just be able to go out to a nice, flat, clean piece of property if that existed somewhere. And then these are all variations off of that add cost to the project. So can everybody hear me okay? All right. So when we look at this scenario, which is the library only on the Brook Street site, we can talk about just some of the general challenges that we have here on this piece of property. So like Jennifer had already mentioned, it's only 2.4 acres. And the entire site right now is either buildings, meaning the post office, the existing senior center, the existing library, or parking lot, concrete, asphalt. So there's a lot of demolition that's going on here that we wouldn't have on a piece of property that didn't already have construction on it. And it's also helpful to kind of compare things a little bit to the Main Street site too, even though that's not part of this analysis. But we didn't have that type of demolition cost at Main Street. And then the next category of challenges here is also more extreme than we had at Main Street, which is on this site we have poor soils kind of wall to wall. The site is relatively flat. It changes in elevation a couple feet from one side to the other. But generally speaking, it's a low-lying flat area with poor soils, and the groundwater is just within a couple feet of the grade of the property. So wherever we build parking lot or building, we're going to run into those poor soils and those water conditions, and we're going to have to work around those. So that's one of the bigger cost drivers after demolition is, just the cost dealing with that dewatering during construction and trying to excavate into those poor soils and all of those types of things that we've discussed before. And then another thing that is happening here is there's relocation costs. If we're talking about the library only scenario, then the library needs to find a place to live. There's cost to either rent or acquire that property, and then whatever that building is going to need to have a renovation designed and a remodel project, and there's construction costs for all of that. And the library would have to move to that temporary facility, which would be an additional move cost. And so those are the highlights of things that would happen here on this site. The other note is that, the post office needs to be permanently relocated. And in this scenario, the senior center also needs to be permanently relocated. Those costs aren't even part of our analysis because those aren't our projects and we don't know what those costs are, but there's certainly costs to the village that need to be considered and what's happening here. And so maybe, Jennifer, we can go to the site, the cost comparison spreadsheet, because we can talk about the last thing here, which is the escalation costs that are associated with this property. If we do the library only there, there's time associated with a couple of different things. If we found a site tomorrow that could receive the current design that we have, that we could basically take everything that we already have, all the work that we've done to date, and we could just plop it down on a piece of property, that would be good. But here we're going to have to redesign the library. We're going to have to go back to conceptual design. It's going to be configured differently. There's different challenges with where we can have access and things around this property. So the building itself needs to get redesigned. And then the other thing that's going to take time is finding the relocation places that we're going to relocate the post office, the senior center. Where's the library going temporarily? How long does it take to design that project? How long does it take to remodel that and have it ready for the library to move? And so that creates this lag from, yes, we might get a site selected on February 7th, but then depending on which site it is, there's going to be a big delay before we'll get back to the same place that we were before in design. And then there might be an even greater delay, while we're waiting for the site to be freed up for us to actually start construction on the site. So in this scenario, we thought that extra time for the library only scenario, if maybe that's a year. So that the start of construction, because of all of those things, would be pushed off one more year than what it could be if we were on a site where we could just get back to design. And that 12 months, especially now, it costs money every day that we're not able to go out and bid the project and buy our construction. The price just keeps going up. And so there's escalation associated with that. And there's also escalation associated with this delay that we've had, where we've taken the time out to relook at our site selection. And so we're going to end up, assuming we get some direction in February, we will have had 5 months that we left our last civil engineering design meeting in August and put all that on hold, and have gone through this process now to evaluate sites. So there's a cost to that as well that we've already incurred. And then we're estimating another 12 months of escalation during further delay for the library site. So that's how we came up with those numbers. And it's different for the different scenarios. And I'll briefly go through each scenario here, but this is kind of the baseline. And so when you add that over $1 million in escalation and $1 million in additional site-specific construction cost, it's $2.254 million that it will cost to build the library if we were to choose that Brooks Street site for the library only. And again, when you read through the narrative for the analysis, there's all the things that were there before of, we don't have room for future expansion. We don't have any outdoor programming space, all of those other negatives to the vision for the library. Those exist here too as well. And so, Jennifer, let's go look at the drawing or the site image for the combined library senior center.
Jeff,
and talk about
for just the library site, could you go back to the visual and just kind of explain to people too, like where the entrance would be and some other things, just so that, because I think that helps explain a little bit of the challenges as well, right? There's not really one main entrance. The red dot is pretty much the trash and the book drop, right? Like, so just some of the other kind of tangibles on the drawing that I'm not sure everybody would necessarily know just by looking at it.
Sure, let's run through that. So the black thing in the middle that we would have to completely redesign the building and where things are in the building. It is a two-story, for the most part, two-story building, the way that it's been conceptualized here. So that's the library. The main access to get in and out of our parking lots is actually through the alleyway, which is on the left side of the property, which is a little bit less than desirable, but we have to have a way that we can get in and out of our drive-through, drop-off, book drop, parking lot areas, all of that. And so that's what that red area is representing, and that's why that's back there on the alley, is that's where people would be able to get in and out of that space. We have the same set kind of challenges like we had at Main Street, where it's difficult how to figure out where a loading, unloading zone, pedestrian drop off, book drop, all of those things are trying to happen again in one area, because we don't have as much access as we would like to have here around the building because of the tight site. And then the two big orange areas are parking lot, and they're separated, which is a little bit of a challenge of just, it's not efficient to have those be built in two different pieces. But then, some of the parking gets to be further and further away from where the front entrance of the building would be. In this scenario, where there's kind of the inside corner of the L, where you see that blue potential stormwater management area, right in the center of the drawing is the front entry to the building. And, pedestrians would be coming up to come into that entrance. We'd be trying to figure out some of the other things in the back with the red area. but then, the people in the parking area that are at the top of the page are potentially even further away from getting to the different points of entry to the building. Do we have parking right adjacent to the front door for people with access needs or seniors or things like that? It's all very challenging. All of those same things are in play here as they were, before at the Main Street site. Is there anything else, Jenny, that you can think of we should talk about?
Jeff, can you talk about the geothermal and the underground storm? Because there is showing storm there, but that's not all the storm. Is that correct?
Right. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we look at the combined option, because it really gets to be tricky. But in this scenario, we're thinking that we're going to be able to find a place for geothermal, which is going to have that geothermal field of wells goes underground. It can go under parking, but it takes up a significant area on the site. So potentially one of our orange parking areas here could have geothermal underneath the complete footprint of the parking. And then the other one would be used up with underground stormwater storage. So we have to collect and manage and filter all of the stormwater that lands on our roof and that lands on our parking lot and in our red drive area. So when you're looking at the property here, we're almost taking up the entire footprint of the property with, non-pervious surfaces that are going to collect stormwater. And then the only place for us to deal with that volume of water is going to be storing it and filtering it underground, which is more expensive than other ways that we could go about that if we had more property. So those things barely fit here, but obviously that's part of the premium costs that we've got in our estimate for this site.
Are there
any other questions on this one? Let's run through the combined scenario which has even another layer of challenges, and then we can talk about questions for this Brook Street site kind of together. So if we look at this drawing, with all the challenges that we know that we have with our library project on a 2.6 acre site, now we're talking about adding the footprint of the senior center, which on this diagram, we've got 17,625 square feet, along with the same size for the library. And then we have parking requirements associated with our building and its function and our use. And there's also parking required for the senior center. And, I think that there's a theory that we could build one building here and a whole bunch of things can be shared. But really, when you get down to talking with what the senior center needs to be and how they function and how the library needs to function, there isn't a lot of sharing going on. So we're planning for enough parking for the library. We're planning for enough parking for the senior center. And so you can see what happens is when we put the senior center building on the site, we didn't have enough room before. Well, now we've eaten up a large portion of that just to land their building on the property. So something that we came up with is the orange areas that are around the perimeter of the site are on-street parking, which we're basically building in the city's property. And I understand that the property that we're building the library is city property too, but if we were a private developer, that's city right of way. That's like, that's the easement that goes through there for utilities, and basically we're in the setback that is the city right of way. We're going to take that space and we're going to use it for parking. So we planned as many parking stalls as we could get out there in that city right of way on street parking. There's a premium to build those parking stalls versus building them all together in the middle of the site. There's a lot of things to be concerned about when we're out there doing construction in that city right away. There's existing curb and sidewalks and things that need to be removed. So there's more demolition for all of that stuff. And so we put a premium to those stalls, which I believe there was 64, something like that, that we were able to get in that on-street parking. And then we've got, drive space and other ways that you need to get in and out and to the buildings. So then we don't end up with very many regular stalls left over on the site. And so to get to the combined total that we need for the library and the senior center, the only other way to do that is to put a bunch of parking stalls underground. So I guess in theory, those stalls are going underneath the library. So if you can see this shape of the library where there's a little landscaping terrace on the one corner, maybe that entire rectangle is a level underground parking. And so we can make up the difference that we need for stalls of 55 stalls could be underneath the building. And then basically everything that's on the site is either site parking, circulation, sidewalk, concrete. There's no room for any kind of on-surface stormwater management here. So all of the stormwater has to go underground. There's more stormwater management required because we have more parking and more building. And so we have zero space left under parking to be able to have geothermal wells. So that's another consequence of this site, is that we would not be able to have a geothermal HVAC system. It's a cost savings to the budget, but I think it's a negative to what was planned for the library. And
Jeff, Carlene has a question. Is now a good time, or do you want to wait until you're done?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that, because then we're going to go back and we're just going to talk about more escalation for this site. Those are really the things that are in addition to the library only scenario, are the ones that I just described.
Carlene, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm just curious because of the, well, I thought of this question before you even said there couldn't be geothermal. And so that's like another boom, really? There would be ongoing costs to maintaining underground parking without any not having stormwater management on the site and underground parking that fills with water seems to me to be kind of an oxymoron.
And Carlene,
Right.
I want to clarify, there would be stormwater management, but it would have to be underground storage. So there would be the storm, but it would be a premium cost because it would have to be underground.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking that's like an ongoing cost of this building that's not even calculated into the construction, but it's an higher cost ongoing, and we miss out on the geothermal, which is another cost in my view. Is that correct?
Right. And so, yeah, operational costs, absolutely. There's filter systems for the underground stormwater filtering and storage that need to be changed on a regular basis. So there's ongoing maintenance with that. And then another thing to think about with the underground parking is in this scenario, because of the groundwater, it's very, very challenging to build that parking on this site. So even to excavate the hole, to dig, the basement to put the parking in, that has to be dewatered the entire time you're trying to build there. Because if you've got a 12-foot deep hole, the water wants to be 2 feet, below grade. So it wants to have 10 feet of water in it the whole time that you're trying to build the parking garage. So there's a whole bunch of challenges with trying to figure out how to do that and build that. It can be done. Again, we're trying to come up with a solution that would work for this site. It can be done, but it's very difficult and costly. But then what's happening is you're building that 10-foot deep underground parking garage underwater for the rest of its life. And the way that this would probably work on this site is that you waterproof the foundation walls for the underground parking, and you actually let the water come up from below, because it's constantly trying to rise up under the building. And then that water is constantly collected in a permanent dewatering system, and it's pumped every day, all day for the rest of the life of the building. And so that's just doesn't seem to be an efficient long-term solution either. But in downtown Madison, all those buildings that you see that have deep parking garages, they have that system, and they're pumping water all the time to keep their parking garages from filling up with water.
Jeff, can I just point out too, an alternative that's been suggested that could be suggested by the village board to the underground parking is possibly the acquisition of the 2 properties across from Waterman Street. So that those have been, suggested as properties that are potentially for sale and could be included as an alternative to add parking and increase the site size. So I do want to point out that the assessed value for those 2 properties together would be $577,000. And it's likely that if they were available for purchase, that they'd probably be sold at the fair market value, which tends to be higher than the assessed value. And then in addition, those properties would require demolition of the existing buildings and are expected to have similar issues with the soil and the dewatering that we're experiencing on this property. So it's likely that even if that was thought as a solution, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but they would likely have similar costs associated if that was explored as an alternative.
Right. And, we're trying to get to an order of magnitude here of what the site specific cost is. So this image that we're looking at right now, when we get through the escalation cost in a minute, it's $4,303,000. And are there other things that we could do or change, or we could try that parking across the street versus underground or what have you? Yes, there's a lot that could be worked on here, but if we're never going to get below $4 million and that doesn't allow this to be a viable solution, well, then we're probably not going to spend more time, trying to figure that out. But so we're just trying to see, how big of a problem this is, and it looks like it's a really big problem. So let's go back to the cost sheet.
Coral has a question also, Jeff. Yeah, please go ahead, Coral. Sorry about that.
This is just me clarifying, because this page is a little confusing. So even with underground parking, we would still end up with 90 parking spots for this option?
No, what this is showing you is that there's 90 stalls that are shown on this piece of paper right now.
Perfect.
The 55 underground would get us to 145, which is the total that's required for the library and the senior center.
Perfect. And I was going to say that 90 wouldn't be enough even for the library, and I was confused, but I probably just missed it when you said it the first time. Thank you.
No, and hopefully it's described in our narrative document, but that's the point, is that we can only fit 90 stalls on this site the way it's drawn, and we have 2 uses here now that require, obviously more than just the library even before. So good.
And
good
Jeff,
question.
Can I just add for reference, the current parking stall count is 35 at the senior center and 36 at the library for a total of 71. And then in addition to that, when I started, the library staff always parked on the street before the pandemic so that they could save the stalls for patrons. So there are some on-street spaces being used as well. So just kind of as a starting point where we're at now versus where we would be with growth. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead. Right.
But I think, to do that analysis, then you should talk about the size of the current library and the size of the current senior center, because they're going to be totally different facilities serving totally different, numbers of people. But okay, let's go to the cost comparison spreadsheet again and just talk about what we're talking about for escalation on this site. Because and I don't know if Rachel's on the call, but in the library only scenario, it's easy because we just kick the library out, or we kick the senior center out, and we kick the post office out, and then, problem solved. We don't need to worry about where they're relocating. But in this scenario, where we've got both the library and the senior center that need to be temporarily relocated, and then, and we need to figure that out, and we need to wait for that to happen. But then we also, have the coordination that's going to take place between the design for the two facilities as well. So even for like stormwater management, or how many parking stalls do we need to design underground underneath the library building? You know, there's all these things that we can't even start to answer those questions until the senior center would get caught up to where we are with their design. And so before we can do anything, we have to wait for them to go through their own process and programming and visioning and all of that. Then they have to go to conceptual design, and then they have to get caught up to where we are, you know, in design development and doing some of their civil engineering. And then finally, we would have to take both of those projects together at the same time, because regardless who's doing the designing and managing that process for the two buildings, you know, they have to be in lockstep. Otherwise, one, you know, the questions can't be answered without the other. So there is that, you know, there's additional cost for more temporary relocation associated, but then there's also, you know, more cost and time for all of that design and coordination as well. So again, we're trying to think that all through, and what we came up with is that for the combined solution, it's probably 2 years, because basically you take the time frame that if we would start in February and go, and we're saying that's a year's delay, well, we're gonna wait an additional year to have the senior center catch up so that we can work together with them. And so that's where the logic came up with the 24 months of further delay. And again, on this property, we've already had the 5 months that we've been delayed during site selection. So you add, you know, what's $2 million in site-specific costs for the combined solution, the 5-month delay, the additional 24-month delay and time for coordination, all of that. And so, you know, the premium, if we're going to do that project, and again, this is the premium to the library budget. This isn't talking about the premium to the senior center budget. For them, they have the same issues of trying to build their building on this property as we do. So whatever the costs were potentially going to be for the senior center, you know, they've got to figure out their own site-specific cost issues. But this is impact to the library project only is the 4.3 million number. So are there questions on the Brook Street property before we move to Alpine in either one of the scenarios, the library only or the library combined?
Jeff, Carlene has a question or comment.
I just want to make a point. I am on the Council on Aging. I'm the village board representative to that. And there is a strong desire among the people who use the senior center and who are on the council to keep the senior center in the location where it is now. It's very accessible to the populations that use that building. And so I just want to put that out there. I can't see the scenario where the library would be the only building there. I think there's a stronger desire to keep the senior center there than there is for the library.
Thank you, Carlene. And I just want to mention too that we did include Rachel, the senior center director, looking at this design to make sure that their needs were accurately reflected. And, you know, we want to work together in partnership with whatever direction our project goes. You know, we want the best for the senior center as well. That's one of the things that we had challenges with, and kind of where we got at the delay that Jeff just referenced, is that if we were to just proceed before the senior center had their design and their needs assessment done, then whatever choices we made would inadvertently affect them if they were co-located and really limit the possibilities for their project. And they'd have to basically fit, you know, their project into a box if they weren't kind of done collaboratively. So go ahead, Jeff, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to mention that in talking with Rachel and just understanding their scenario a little bit in this site, is that, you know, maybe the highest and best use of this piece of property is for the senior center to be on this property by itself. Another possible good solution is the senior center on this site in conjunction with a private multifamily development, which is a very good downtown redevelopment idea. And that obviously if the library goes here by itself, neither one of those two potential best solutions for the senior center exist anymore because we took the property. And even in the combined solution, it's certainly not the best solution for the senior center, just like it's, probably not the best solution for the library either, to try to fit both facilities and serve their different clients, on this site. So I think there should be a discussion about, well, wow, maybe the Brook Street site is a better site for the senior center, and we shouldn't take that site.
Laura's got a question or comment. Laura, go ahead.
Just really a comment of maybe how we're considering the escalation costs. If we are really being collaborative with the senior center, I don't know that 12 months for the library only at Brook Street would be enough for them to do all of their visioning and things like that. So I'm just mentioning it as maybe something to reconsider, because I do want to be collaborative with the senior center and allow them enough time to do their process and come up with their needs. So I don't know if that 12 months would be enough for that.
Right. And I was joking before, but I wasn't really joking. This scenario of the library only, there is no time in here for them to do any of that. This is the time frame for us to redesign our building on this site. It's assuming that they get out before we need them to get out. And I don't, where they're going to go temporarily. It's assuming that they would do all of that planning and visioning for their new facility. That would be happening over in wherever their temporary facility is. That we wouldn't wait for that.
Thanks for that clarity, Jeff.
Can we just talk too about temporary locations? Because I think from my standpoint, I have a lot of concerns about relocating the library or the senior center temporarily. I know it's going to have a big impact on operations for either or both facilities, especially if it were a concurrent relocation in terms of availability of facilities. I also know some folks have kind of tried to come up with helpful solutions about possible options for that. I know the village staff has worked with Rachel to look at the village hall as a potential option, but the time that building was constructed, if you have to do any remodeling, it triggers new ADA and building codes that aren't currently met in that facility. The costs that Rachel and the village staff identified to make that a temporary solution for them were pretty high. I don't want to speak, out of turn on what they identified. But the other thing is, like, in terms of the library, the layout of the village hall is really exactly the opposite of what we would need for a temporary solution, because it's you walk in and it's got, facilities like the elevator and the restrooms, and a lot of closed off rooms, and then also 2 levels. And so the library is exactly the opposite. We want to have, with very little staff, be able to see the whole space and not have those divided spaces. The other thing too is the load bearing strength of floors has to be a lot stronger for book stacks than even car garages. I learned that at my last job. So the second floor at the village hall, as it exists, may not meet the load bearing requirements to support book stacks, or at least not full height stacks. So there's a lot of issues that would make that really not a good option, even though it might seem from the public perspective before you dive in that could be a viable solution, and it's really not a good solution, or at least not a cost-effective one for a variety of reasons. So I just want to mention that.
Right, and I agree. I don't think the existing village hall is a good temporary facility for either one. So then, everybody's homework for next week would be go out and find a 30,000 square foot facility that we can rent for, 18 months. And then after you get done finding that, go find a 17,000 square foot facility or whatever the square footage of the existing senior center is. I mean, it's a big deal to think that you're going to take both of these major functions and find a ready-made piece of property somewhere. I mean, it's almost like you would build a temporary facility almost to be able to house. I mean, there's a lot to that. So just in general, the estimating that's been done here for these scenarios is very conservative. With problems with contaminated soil or other issues on the Brook Street site during construction, or, you know, problems with timing, all of these scenarios can cost a lot more money than what is here. We're not trying to, you know, pile on, but very quickly we could talk about some of the risks that aren't priced here, just like, you know, we don't have the cost of all of the things associated with the senior center in this analysis either. And those are all village costs. So are there any questions again for this piece of property, or should we go to Alpine?
Can I just mention too that the cost escalation, if I didn't already, the cost escalation here would also apply if, you know, if somebody were to refer to the numbers we provided previously for the North Main Street site, that this same cost escalation would need to be added to that site at this point. So if for some reason somebody wanted to go back to Main Street and saw these numbers and said, you know, well, before you were saying $600,000, well, whatever the numbers we had before would have to be increased by the same escalation because of time, to be comparing apples to apples, because it would apply just because of the increased construction costs that are going on these days.
Right, and I did rerun those numbers. So the bottom line number for the Main Street site would be just over $1 million now, taking into account the 5-month delay.
And just to be clear, for anyone who might be listening to this later, that might be a lower number than this Brook Street site, but one of the reasons why that site was rejected was also the impact on the community there of that much pavement and everything else. Just to make sure that, like, right now we're talking numbers, but one of the reasons why that site was dismissed by the village board was wider than just the numbers. And I know we all know that, and I just want to make sure that we're saying that in this context as well.
Right, yeah, and technically the village board voted to no longer have that be a possible solution, but we thought that we would check those numbers just the same because it was easy to do once we figured out this logic. Let's go take a look at the image for the Alpine only. We do have some site-specific cost here, but in general, we're able to take our existing library conceptual design and could very quickly adapt it to this site. So the shape of the building is similar. It's still 2 stories, the same size. On this drawing, we show a couple of areas where there could be future expansion shown, and those are dotted in at the ends of the building there. The configuration of the site allows the drop-off delivery red zone kind of at the back of the building to the north there, and then we have, and I believe the brook drop is on that end of the building, and then we've got a easy access for parking adjacent to the front of the building, the drop-off area for pedestrians, all of those types of things. We have more flexibility here to kind of design things in the places that they need to be. The parking lot, you know, would have the number of stalls that we need and would be one contiguous, more efficient construction. And then there wouldn't be any underground stormwater management here. The elevations of the site lend itself. It slopes from the top of the page down to the bottom of the page. As you go down Alpine Parkway, you can see where there's the existing stormwater pond down there on the corner. So things want to move in that direction. And so we would put our stormwater management just outside the parking area. And because of how this site works, that could be a bioretention basin instead of a big wet pond or underground stormwater storage, which is relatively cost effective and certainly more attractive. So all of those things work fairly well.
And Jeff, the
a
parking,
couple of things.
can I interject quick too, Jeff? The parking
Sure.
lot with the Nature Alliance's recommendation, part of it was having some of that nature in the parking lot to help absorb some of that. And the parking lot is kind of sized to allow those kind of separations between the parking and that type of stuff that they had recommended. So it's kind of already in that shape. Just wanted to point that out.
Yes, yep. It's not going to be a big orange rectangle. There's going to be, islands between batches of parking stalls, and that in areas where you have parking that backs up, there would be like a median between those stalls. So as much as possible, that water, gets managed where it can drain in those areas. So we're not trying to move a whole bunch of stormwater somewhere mechanically. But anyway, that's a good thing to point out. And then there are some specific costs that we have to deal with here that we didn't have on the Brooks Street site. So we had to do, there was a wetland delineation done. And I would think that if the library moves forward on this project, that we would, or on this site, we would reimburse the village for that cost. And then we already had geotech, soil borings on the other property. And we do have to have those on this property. We did the preliminary, and we probably would do a couple more borings once we know exactly where the building would go. So we do have that cost, which is in addition to those other properties. And then, something that we were talking about, which is really an opportunity here for this property, is having enhanced landscaping or site restoration. So again, right now, the field that we're going to build in is a agricultural field that just hasn't been in use for just a few years. So it's basically, weeds, and there's the dirt pile that the village left there for us at the front entrance. And so really what should be done is we should create good upland habitat for the wetlands, and we should do prairie restoration in the areas that are outside the building footprint and all of that, and kind of put that property back together again. And so we would budget for that, and then we would budget for pathways that we want to have that connect to the pathways that are out there, and to make sure that the pathways that people use now are configured so they can still do their thing, but then to have those connect to the rear of our building where we have activity areas, and that maybe there's more cross connectivity with the pathways. And so we're budgeting for that as well.
Jeff, can we pause? We have two questions. Can we pause for first Carlene and then Coral's question? Go ahead, Carlene.
Sure.
I wonder if we have absolutely decided on this site. I have a couple of, not on this site on Keller Alpine. So if we go back to the preliminary borings, and in my packet, it's page 45. I don't know if there were any others. And we look at the places where the soil borings were made. Sites 6 and 8 there across from Cassander are actually a little higher elevation and further away from the wetland, and also have the opportunity to route those paths around the library without getting close to the wetland area. And I wonder if we've made the decision, first of all, that we're going to site 5 and not considering anything else on this area. That's one question. A concern that I have is that the area up there by 6, 7, and 8 had been delineated for recreational fields, which I absolutely would not want to see have happen here. And I think the library up in that place could be better. Plus the elevation could possibly lend itself to maybe some reconsidering of the conceptual drawing to have a walkout basement and some collaborative fundraising for a nature center that is combined with the library. So I know I just threw a lot of stuff out there, but that's sort of where my head is in thinking about the possible.
Arlene, can I address a few of those things?
Sure.
First of all, we haven't absolutely set on this location. It's the easiest spot. It's the spot that's already zoned for institutional. We would have to rezone the area up at the north site, which we were afraid would cause some delays in rezoning and replatting and costs that way. The other concern that some of the architects had was with it being the higher lands is in the Nature Alliance's presentation, they already talked about how that's where the animals want the highland and those type of spaces, and putting the library there would take up something like 28% of that higher area. And so that was a concern that we had too, was now we're building a library up there on the higher spaces where the animals want to be. We're adding lights that aren't already there. Whereas when we're closer to where the other buildings are and we're able to be at a little bit lower elevation, we're not going to stick out like a sore thumb, which is something that we had heard a lot of. We didn't want the library a shining beacon in the park, right? So being a little bit lower actually helps us get away from having that kind of big building in a park. The other thought kind of, we'll definitely look at where we want to go, but the other issue is that the further we go north, the further we get away from the people, right? So, you know, you're a couple blocks north, which changes that half-mile radius of where the people are that we are serving. So are we tied to this specific spot? No, we will definitely look at where we need to go, but that's kind of why we focused on this location. And a lot of it was because it's already the I-2 zoning that we need, and it's kind of close to the food pantry. It's close to some of the other buildings. So,
and Carly, can I just add to what Jenny was saying too? Is this was largely informed before the Nature Alliance report came out too. So we definitely want to consider, you know, we can consider all the options, but you know, we kind of, when we first started, you know, there was a desire to keep an uninterrupted pathway, and so that was part of the reason the location was suggested, both because of the wetlands and how the village had planned to use the property, but also because of there's already a driveway there at the end of Oregon Parks Avenue, and that's kind of why we had started to focus on this location. The wetland delineation that was completed goes to the middle of the two Cassanders. So if we were to go on the north site, the northernmost site, we may need to do an additional wetland delineation for that portion of the property. And as Jenny mentioned, it would have to be the zoning, the comp plan would have to be amended. So those are just some of the considerations. It doesn't, we're not trying to say we're ignoring those considerations. It's just kind of how we started down that path and why we kind of ended up at that point for the conversation starter. And we can certainly continue the conversation, but that's kind of just where the conversation started, based on where the village had shown. I think you had seen where the village had shown possible housing or the village hall on that former school site prior, and that's kind of where we started our conversation.
The other thing about that northern piece of property is it's flat. It's not, there isn't a change in elevation that would allow for the walkout basement concept. If we look at the property that we're talking about that we have on our site image, there we do have that kind of elevation change, which helps us manage the stormwater on this site. And it also has the grade change so that the rear of our building, which faces the trees that you see on this image, that area is lower than the parking lot area. And it creates kind of a, you know, that maybe outdoor community space and helps with those things. So the site to the north is potentially flat and harder to deal with water because there isn't grade, and potentially there are, you know, lower level kind of wetland areas up there. So from my perspective, from a construction perspective, I do think the lower site is preferred. You know, not to say that the decision can't be made to study the other site, but we haven't done that in detail like we did this lower portion.
Pearl, go ahead.
I don't have a lot to offer here. I think one of the things that I was knowing that we put this together before the Nature Alliance kind of stuff came out, I have been thinking and talking a little bit with people I'm close to about the importance of the continuity of that path, and in particular, like allowing for a path around the library that does not go past the parking lot. Particularly, I was discussing, and it came up that right now you can take a really young kid on a bicycle and like just let them go around that loop, and you don't have to worry about them like crossing traffic or anything like that. And one of the things the Nature Alliance kind of highlighted that I think will be important if we choose this location is having a method of going around the library that does not include crossing that driveway, just because the more I've thought about it, the more impactful that was when my kids were really little, to allow them to like go in circles and not really worry about what they were doing on their bicycles and scooters and what have you. So mine was more of a statement of that is important to me as well, more than anything else. So there you go.
Thank you, Coral.
Yeah,
Thanks, Coral.
and if we look at that alpine image again, if the recreational space is down on the backside of the building, pathway connections can travel, you know, behind the library and around the library and through that space. And we would want that. We want that pedestrian connection to our outdoor spaces as well.
And we even talked about having, you know, a cut through from one path to the other. I've talked to people who say that, you know, having a 3-mile loop for a 2-year-old, it gets really long. So it'd be kind of nice to have, you know, that kind of cut through. So we kind of thought that would be a nice spot to have some libraries. So, you know, it's things that's kind of why we put that allowance in there, just so that we can keep track of the costs of making sure everybody, if this is chosen, would be able to have that option.
All right, and then I guess that leads to our biggest site-specific cost here, because this site is not flat like the Brook Street site, that there is change in elevation, and there's areas of parking lot and building that would be filled because of the change in grade. But I see that as a really nice opportunity. You know, if you imagine being on first floor of the library and you can walk out to the back of the building, and if there's an elevated terrace back there, or if it steps down to a terrace at the back of the building where there's an outdoor space that's actually above grade, and then obviously all of the area below that could just be outdoor, you know, community area as well. So I think the grades create a bunch of opportunities for design. There's just cost of not having a perfectly flat site, but there's savings in how we're able to manage the stormwater, you know, that offset that. But we definitely did look at the construction and the grading for that. And then there is going to be some cost to go back and do some rework on conceptual design. And, you know, maybe that's going to take, I think when we scroll down and look at the escalation cost, we included basically 2 months here for a restart at the Alpine site, which would be in addition to the 5 months that we've had already. So potentially there's 2 more for us to get right back to where we were. And then we move forward and move to, you know, construction documents and trying to get the project bid as fast as we can to head off this cost escalation. So that's where we came up with those numbers and came up with the total site-specific cost for this property of the $734,000.
Carlene, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, this is just mostly for clarification for me and for people who ask me this question that I can't answer, about what the difference is between conceptual design, which is what we have now, and the final design. So would you just define those so that I and people who are watching understand the difference, please?
Okay, so where we are right now, if we're talking about the building, because there's two components to the design, right? There's the site and there's the building. So what we had when we went to Main Street is we, for the most part, had the conceptual design done for the building. And when we say conceptual, it means the shape of the building, the height and the size of the building was all kind of figured out, right? So we had that angled bench shape. We knew it was 2 stories. We knew it was 33,000 square feet. Inside that building, we knew that there was enough room in there for certain size boxes. We need so much space for meeting rooms. We need so much space for the children's collection. We need so much space for the front lobby. We need so much space for mechanicals. And those are just blocks of space. And so if you looked inside that box, that doesn't it doesn't have windows. It doesn't have an exterior on it. It has a bunch of boxes in there. The boxes maybe don't even have doors, or we don't know exactly how the boxes are arranged, or, there's a lot going on there. So we know the size and the shape and the use and the spaces. But when you move from that conceptual design where that building fits, all the stuff fits in there, and you want to start placing it on a site, then you go to what's called design development. From conceptual development, we go to design development. In design development, we start the civil engineering for the site, and then we start actually getting into detail on the building. Where exactly are the rooms? How are they configured? Where are the windows? What are the size? What's the design of the window? What's the material? All of those types of things. The finishes, there's a lot to be designed to come up with all the fine detail. And then eventually we go to what's called construction documents phase. And that's where, okay, now, the people on the building committee kind of know what these rooms are going to look like, or they've seen some images and things, right? So we have some renderings. So everybody knows that the boardroom is going to have this long table with 14 chairs, and there's going to be some art on the wall, and we're going to have this kind of drop ceiling thing down in the middle of the room, right, with lighting. But now we need to draw the drawings to a level that people can actually go out there and build it, right? They can manufacture the structural steel, and they can, all of these things, windows to certain size and specification, and all of that. People need to be able to pull out a tape measure and know that this wall extends 12 3/4 inches. I mean, all of that detail needs to be on those drawings. So, conceptual design is just the first blush at that. And what will happen when we go through redoing conceptual design, we're not going to change the planning for the uses in the building and the size of the boxes, but they might get rearranged completely differently. Certainly on the Brook Street site, when you change the shape of the exterior of the building, it's like, how do you get all of those adjacencies figured out? What's on second floor? What's on first floor? What's looking out the window towards the park? What's facing the alley and the buildings across the alley on Brook Street site. Here on Alpine, we would be talking about, figuring out how we'd rearrange those things to best take care of where we can have all this, drop off access. And then obviously the spaces and the great views and things that would be out the back of the building. So we're probably going to rearrange some stuff inside the building to take advantage of that. So here a couple of months, at the other site, there would be quite a long time to kind of rework all that.
And just to clarify, the conceptual design was based on all those listening sessions that happened a couple of years back. So this didn't just come right out of the blue. This conceptual design, I'm saying this for people who are watching, is based on a lot of work, preliminary work that's already been done. It just hasn't been finalized yet. Thank you for that. For all
and Carlene, can I just elaborate on what you just said too? It's very common to do what we did when there's fundraising involved, because you don't want to spend a lot of money designing spaces to a level of detail that will later be cut out if you don't have the funds necessary. So the process we followed was in the agreement, the memorandum of understanding with the village, that we would start with a concept design to share with community what we anticipated, the direction we anticipated to go. And then once the funds were secured for the project, then we would go to the next level of design development, like Jeff talked about. So that the process we followed was by design, and that's very common in situations where there's fundraising, that the plans are only at that concept level when fundraising takes place. So that's not atypical. It does get challenging when the project spans multiple years. You get those escalation costs and budget changes and things. But
I just think it's really important for people to understand why this has taken this long, and that it's not something that happened overnight and all those things. So thank you for all those clarifications.
Okay.
Kyle, did you have a question?
Yeah, not a question, but just to add on to what Jennifer was saying, I think it's also worth remembering that a lot of decisions were made based on the site that we had and the limitations of that site, that I think now that we're exploring different sites need to also be assessed. Some big decisions. So I think it's nice to look back on it and say, hey, we did some work but we can't expect to build that library on this site and have it be the right library.
And the same thing, you'll see the same thing at the Brook Street location is, we could have just plopped that design down on both locations, but any locations selected, you want to have it fit and match. And you still want to use the needs assessment and the concept that work that you did. There's certain things, the children's area wants to be by certain other spaces for functionality, and just customer access. So there'll be a lot of that that'll still translate over, but again, there'll be things that are unique to the site to best make use of the opportunities available wherever it may go, or to make it work in whatever location.
Yeah, and something that Kyle said there made me think of the fact that, yeah, we might be taking 2 months here of some rework with conceptual design, but it would be the best time ever spent on this library project, because we're doing it to take advantage of this site, and there's some extraordinary things that we can do with this Alpine property that we can't do on the other properties. And so there's no doubt that a library here would be a better library than the library that we would have been constrained to design and build at the Main Street site. So I think we're getting to the best possible solution maybe at some point, but so here the rework would be associated with trying to find positives.
And Jeff, just to add to that again, so you just said that we could potentially build a better library here, and I think we can, but there's also a potential that there's some cost savings when we have a little bit more of a blank slate on what we can build on. Like we need to look at it a number of different ways, and I think there are opportunities for us to do really nice things because the site is a little bit bigger, that'll benefit the community not only by reducing costs, but also by increasing what the library can provide.
Can I just echo to add on to that a little bit? As some community members have wondered, well, can't we just build more stories? And from a functional standpoint, 2 stories is really the highest a library of our size wants to go. I had some extensive conversations with libraries like Stoughton and Madison Public, who has both some single-story branches and also multiple-story branches, and they echoed, a lot of staffing time and additional staffing costs associated with more stories, especially Madison, because they can compare branches in different configurations, and heard some really powerful anecdotes about the extra costs associated if you go beyond that second story. So that's just want to provide that context, because you can always build up, but for us, it's just with the staffing sizes we have, it's really not a good solution to go beyond 2 stories.
And those would be continuous
Right,
long-term costs, Jennifer. Like that's, I think that's
Yes.
something that we will want people to know, is we're trying to make this building efficient. We're trying to make it geothermal. We're trying to make things so that our costs don't go up as our library goes up. And so adding the 3rd floor and the staff and everything that would go along with that will be a continuous increase of cost to the taxpayers, to everybody, by doing that. So I think that's something that we're all aware of and thinking about, but I think I want to make sure everybody else understands that as well.
Yeah, and we did look at more stories going more vertical. There's exponentially more cost on this site to do that because of the poor soils. So as you put more mass in a smaller footprint, there's going to be more and more deep foundation work that we have to do. That's something that we didn't talk about when we went through this analysis, but to build the 2-story library on the Brook Street site, whether it's with the senior center or not, there's going to need to be special foundations to be able to support it on that soil. And then, another thought is that the senior center can't be 2 stories either. A 2-story senior center is kind of like a oxymoron. It's like the people with the most challenging access needs aren't going to design that out of the gate either. So it's important for them to be single story. So
and I just want to elaborate on what Jeff is, sorry, Jeff. I just wanted to elaborate on what Jeff was saying about the single story. And that's kind of the reason why we ended up with, in this analysis, with 2 separate buildings, is because both the library and senior center have a lot of things that really want to and need to be on the 1st floor. Like the drive-through book drop. With COVID, we'd like to have a pickup window. The senior senior center does has deliveries and meal pickups and mobility access. So for both facilities, it's really important to have that first floor access. And so that's where the again, going beyond 2 stories becomes really complicated in addition to more expensive. So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah.
Kyle, oh, sorry,
And-
Kyle,
yeah.
did you have another question? Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to take the thing off. How do I do that?
Okay, sorry. Just
There
want
we
to
go.
make sure.
Sorry.
Okay, awesome.
He's just waving at us. Yeah, I was just going to say that there's access challenges for the senior center on whatever site they build on too, because they have the drop-off delivery stuff, but then they also have their pedestrian access, and you don't want those 2 things, you know, in the same place at the same time either, for safety standpoint and everything else. So it's very challenging to figure out how to get the buildings to function when you don't have enough space around them. All right, so what other questions do we have?
Is it our plan to make a recommendation to the board, to the village board on February 7th for one of these sites? I guess that's not really a question to you, Jeff. I guess it's to Jenny.
Torn? I mean, I think we know, I have a pretty good idea what our recommendation would be. I think it probably makes sense to provide a recommendation, but it's also not our decision. So it's kind of hard to say, I mean, Carlene, I guess I would love what your opinion on that would be, being on the board.
I think it would be, I think as a member of the board and having talked to other members of the board, I think, you know, the board is really relying on the library board that has really been neck deep in this for a while, and to make a recommendation. And if we need to make a motion to make that recommendation, I'm happy to make that motion, because I think that the board is looking to this group to, you know, say, well, we've studied it all, and these are all the consequences, ramifications, positive and negative, of different decisions, and based on that, this is, you know, we think Keller Alpine is the best site. That's what I would prefer as a board member.
Okay.
So we have Laura that has a comment, and then Coral. Can we do those folks and then come back to Carlene's point?
Yep.
It kind of goes along with what Carlene was saying, but more in what are we going to be providing to the board as in materials? I'm assuming that we'll be providing everything that was shared here today, but may I make a suggestion that we have like a little bit of an executive summary that outlines how this process, how the process that you went through to come up with all of this information, because I think that would be really helpful for the village board to have in writing and for just the public to have. Because I know we've kind of gotten that tonight just by hearing Jeff speak about all of this work. But I think just a little summary would be beneficial to add to these materials.
Great suggestion. Thanks, Laura. Coral?
Sorry, my mouse disappeared the minute I was trying to say something. Yeah, I think I hear your thing, Jenny. This is not our decision to make ultimately. But when I look at this and I think about the amount of work that went into raising the money that we do have, and the amount of money that the village has already, you know, agreed to take out as loans for this, I do not see how it is fiscally responsible of us to suggest anything other than Alpine. And I also think that as trustees of the library, it is not responsible of us to offer anything else as a solution because of the limitations that those buildings would offer in the future. Our inability to grow, our inability to like get any bigger, those sorts of things. And friends, feel free to disagree with me. Like, I have thick skin here, But as we have sat through all of this, I am not sure how, as a library trustee, I can stand behind something that would not deliver a library that would even stand the test of 5 years. And that is my very strong feeling.
I appreciate that.
If I
Kyle, did you
can-
have? Yeah.
Yeah, this is deja vu, isn't it? Like, we had a special meeting 2 months ago, and I think we're in the same spot, and we looked at Carlene and Mike and kind of got some advice on, you know, how they wanted to approach it. I guess, is anything different from the two of them that would make us want to change our course? If not, then it just seems like we're discussing things we've already discussed, and let's go do it, you know?
Laura, yeah.
Just wanted to add a little bit of a comment to what Kyle's saying is what I've been saying to the 5th graders that I've been talking to about their project is that I want to hear what they have to say. I want to know their opinions because I don't want them to have to build a new library when they're our age. I want their kids to not consider building a new library when they're our age. I want to put this off for a few generations. So I think we need to make our well-informed decision and suggest that as our recommendation.
Then I would entertain a motion. It sounds like to recommend to the village board that the new library be built at Keller Alpine Parkway. I would
moved.
take that motion.
Severson.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. This is Gaplin.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that is a 7-0 vote. I don't know, I can't even add anymore, so.
So Dr. Bergstrom isn't here, so it'd be a
6-0.
unanimous
Yeah.
6-0 vote. Yes.
So, well, thank you guys. Is there anything else that you think we should put with the village board? Laura, I love your suggestion of putting the process. We'll make sure there's a summary of that. This all will be included in their packet. And Jennifer has kind of a memo that she usually includes, so that will also include our recommendation that we just voted on. Carlene, is there any? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Before we hear from Carlene, the other thing I want to mention too is I'm going to include a summary of funds available to date to show all the funding sources that have been committed and what that dollar amount is. Because if we pursue a project that has a cost that's different than the funding we have available, we either need to reduce the scope of the project or the quality of the project or secure additional funding. So I just want to point that out as a reality that we'll make sure to include those numbers so that those are transparent and available when the decisions are being made. We have right now a total of, we have a total of funding of just under 12.7 million, including the village contribution, the funds raised, our recent MCF grant, and impact fees, along with the capital campaign contributions, both what we've collected, and then we have about 24 donors that are doing a pledge plan of multi-year gift installments that are still outstanding. Carrie, do you have something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, could you also somewhere add in there, and because everybody's mentioned this already, but I think we want to make sure that the village understands and that the Oregon Nature Alliance understands that we really do appreciate their recommendations, and that if the village does go with the Keller Alpine site, you know, we're committed to working with the Nature Alliance, you know, on having a shared vision for the project, you know, and following as many of the recommendations as we feasibly can, and maybe doing some fundraising with them.
Coral, yeah.
Coral?
Yeah, so the only other thing I was gonna ask is, I know that last time we went before the village board, there was some discussion at least about contributions that might be revoked if we move location. Now, I know that we already had said at that point in time that the site that we had fundraised based on was not viable. So my assumption has been that if there were people who had serious concerns, that potentially we would already have heard about those. But can we confirm, or like, do we have an idea of whether there are donors who do wish to receive their funds back, given that we are changing locations?
Jenny, do you want to take this one or do you want me to? So, you know, I feel like if anybody, majority of, I've been in close contact with many of the key donors for the project. I can't communicate with all 800 plus donors, but I have tried to keep updating some of the key donors, as well as making sure that that information is readily available to those donors who are looking for it. You know, we can't speak for any particular donor. We did have one refund request. We do have you know, one set of donors that really cared about the Main Street location. And so for some people, that location, you know, had special connections to, or, you know, maybe against a particular location. We could have had people perhaps pull out or want to have their contribution back if we had continued at the Main Street site once they kind of realized the impacts of that. So, you know, at this point, I have not heard it from any donor in terms of, you know, saying that they plan to do X and request a refund if we proceed a certain path. That certainly could happen, but most of the people I've heard from are, their main concern is just getting the library built in the immediate future. I heard from one person today who said they've been waiting 22 years since they moved to Oregon to get this built. So I think just getting it built is the main thing I've heard from folks. And while some folks have shared preferences for one thing or another, I think they're seeing the way the conversation is being had, and they appreciate the diligence that's going into trying to make a thoughtful decision, the research, the thought going into the costs, and trying to do something right for the future, even if that, you know, might be in a place that they might not be their preferred place in an ideal world. Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that we've been trying to keep everybody as aware of the process as possible. We've reached out multiple times trying to say, if you have questions, if you have concerns, please let us know. And, you know, we haven't heard very much, but again, I think some people are also waiting to see what the final decision is. So, but we will work with, you know, what we have, and we appreciate every donor and everybody's decisions and thoughts, so.
And I would like to think most people really just, you know, made their donation to support the library, but I also feel strongly that if anybody doesn't feel good about supporting the library at a particular location, that we should, you know, should refund their funds if they really don't feel good about supporting the project anymore. So.
Yep. Okay. Well, is there anything else on the agenda, Jennifer?
This was the only thing.
Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So we will have a conversation with the village on Monday, February 7th at 5 p.m. That meeting is in person. So we will be at the village hall to discuss that. If questions or concerns come up before then, please reach out to us. We would love to make sure that we have all the information possible for that board meeting and have any questions answered for anybody on the board, anybody in the public, please reach out. Our next meeting is Wednesday, February 9th at 5 p.m. Are there any other future agenda items anybody would like to have added? Okay, I want to thank Jeff for joining us tonight and for putting all this information together, along with OPN, who's been a part of it, and the village staff who has helped us. So I just want to thank everybody for all of their efforts in getting all this information together. And then I would take a motion to adjourn.
So
That sounds like Carlene and Kyle. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your time, and we will see you in about a week. So,
okay, bye everybody.
Aye.
Bye, everybody.